Let me start with you, Eleanor. So at Thursday's testimony for James Comey lasted nearly 3 hours. The former FBI director said clearly that Trump had lied. He called him a liar, and he actually claiming the president he hoped and suggested that the FBI would drop the investigation. So this rhetoric, these words, these terms, hope and suggested, is it considered directive in terms of trying to obstruct justice?
Well, Mr. Comey was testifying under oath, and he said that he interpreted the president's words as a directive that he did not follow, but that caused him enough concern that he took contemporaneous notes of the meeting, recorded notes, and shared his opinions with other top justice officials. Legally, the president has now engaged an outside lawyer, and that lawyer had a press conference yesterday in which he said that Mr. Comey was not telling the truth about these exchanges with the president. And so you've got a kind of a legal confrontation set up, but the president's lawyer was not under oath. And the probe will go forward, and I think the legal jeopardy to this president has increased substantially, and obstruction of justice is one of the charges that they will be looking at.
Well, these all seem very technical, and if Trump were investigated for obstruction of justice, like you said, what would it bring to Trump's team and his presidency? I want to pass on to this question to Mr. Dunham.
Well, right now, Trump's team is in trouble. At the testimony yesterday, Director Comey said it was not only Trump, but his team were liars. And the legal jeopardy is not as much right now to the president as to the people around him in his campaign, in his White House. But I think one of the significant things that happened yesterday at the hearing was Comey laid what I would call a perjury trap. It's not a crime to lie to reporters. It's not a crime to lie in a tweet. But it's a crime if the FBI is talking to you or if a grand jury is talking to you to deny something that is true. And so I think that what Comey did is he laid down a series of markers, and I think that's where the future legal liability has. I think the White House is already in political trouble, but that's where the legal trouble to the president lies the most, I think.
I want to turn to our Hong Kong guest there, Mr. David Law. Do you think that the highlights of the trouble should be inside the media or inside the people around Trump, or Trump himself and his administration?
Well, clearly this is trouble for Trump himself as well as for the people surrounding Trump immediately. There is some question of whether he can be prosecuted. There is actually an unresolved legal question as to whether a sitting president can be the object of a criminal prosecution. The Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel has taken the position in the past that a sitting president cannot be prosecuted, but that position has not been tested in court. And it's also entirely separate from the question of whether Trump can be impeached. Now, on the question of whether Trump can be impeached, really the tradition here is an impeachable offense is whatever a majority of the House of Representatives thinks is impeachable. In fact, it was Gerald Ford, who later became president of the United States, who himself said that when he was pushing for the impeachment of Supreme Court Justice William Douglas. So he faces trouble on several fronts, and if there is indeed anything resembling the announcement of an investigation of Trump himself, or if there's an effort to bring criminal charges against him, that will be tremendously distracting for the White House. It will be very difficult for them to make any progress on legislative fronts, such as, say, tax reform or deregulation. And I think you'll see the Trump White House even more on the defensive than it already is, and even less able of pushing forward legislative priorities such as healthcare reform.
Right, before all these judicial processes start, Comey was also saying that Trump asked for loyalty from him during their one-on-one conversations. He promised honesty instead, and Trump said honest loyalty. Does that make things more difficult for the U.S. intelligence sector, which is one part of the government, technically, say that the new nominated FBI Director Christopher Wray to brief Trump further on Russian interference? Will that affect his investigation into Trump administration?
Well, I think what it means at a minimum as a practical matter is that intelligence officials are going to have to watch their behavior with the president very carefully. Here is someone who is somewhat unpredictable and has shown that he can put high-ranking, supposedly independent investigative officials in very difficult situations. He's publicly criticized the intelligence community on several occasions before. He is known for having rejected intelligence briefings. And I think that whether it's Christopher Wray, the new FBI director, or any of these other officials, they will be very much on guard in dealing in the future with President Trump.
Well, Ms. Eleanor Clift, do you think that the obstruction of justice or abuse of power will happen again on the current FBI nominee, Christopher Wray?
Oh, I think he will be very mindful of his own reputation and the FBI's reputation going forward. And while technically the president could fire him without cause, I think the president is now going to be rather constrained in his dealings with the intelligence community as well. I just wanted to say something about impeachment. It would have to start in the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the Republicans. And so it's unlikely, unless we get the proverbial smoking gun, that they're going to begin impeachment proceedings. And even if a majority in the House voted for impeachment, the trial is in the Senate, and that would take 2/3 of the Senate to convict. So as long as this president can keep his party behind him, that's his hold on the office. And they're working furiously to try to get some legislative accomplishments. I don't know whether it's possible. There are so many divisions within the Republican Party. But this can go in so many different directions that it's really hard to predict with any certainty what Mr. Trump will ultimately face, or how his party might ultimately try to rescue him and rescue themselves.
Rick, in terms of impeachment, do you think it's a question of when or if?
I think it's much more if right now. As long as the Republicans control the House, as Eleanor said, I don't think that there is any kind of political will for them to impeach the president. That could change if the Democrats take control in 2018. Then I think impeachment would be highly likely, but we're getting pretty hypothetical because we're predicting the results of the next midterm election. I don't think impeachment is on the horizon right now, at least the immediate horizon.
Let's zoom back a little bit and look at this from a broader picture. Comey actually told the Intelligence Committee that he asked a friend to leak the information to the New York Times about the encounters with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. This move was aimed to prompt the appointment of a special counsel, according to Comey himself. But why did a U.S. official have to resort to the media in this matter in the first place? Rick, you've been in the media industry for a long time.
I mean, Eleanor and I both have experience with this. I mean, we have happily been the recipient of leaks from the White House, leaks from Congress. What was so interesting to me watching this is the first time I remember under oath a public figure talking about how he leaked something and why he leaked something. I mean, I guess as a reporter, I can't be against leaks, but I want to differentiate between this leak and leaks of classified government documents. This was unclassified. This was notes that he had written about his conversation with Donald Trump. He had not leaked them until Donald Trump lied, at least lied in Comey's mind, about that same conversation. And then he gave this to a friend, knowing that the friend would pass it along to someone. Maybe he knew it was the New York Times, and it did appear in the New York Times, and it did turn out to be true. Now, Donald Trump was up at 6 a.m. this morning, Washington time, and he was tweeting about leaker. I mean, he's already using this to try to discredit Comey. I think it's legitimate to talk about leaking, but I also think that there's no question that this was legal. What he did was legal, and he believed it was tactical. He believed it was necessary to support his own reputation. And to correct what he thought was a wrong committed by Donald Trump.
I want to ask Eleanor, our fellow journalist, about the same question. Is this another Watergate story in the making?
Oh, it's so different from Watergate. Watergate was a paranoid president trying to cover up a third-rate burglary, and he abused his power in the process. This is about possible collusion with a foreign government and an abuse of power. So, I mean, I think in many ways it's worse than Watergate.
Thank you very much. That was our CC guest, Ms. Eleanor Clift, and here in Beijing, Mr. Rick Dunham, and in Hong Kong, David Law. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Well, this is the final point for our discussion today. Hardly a day goes by, I have to say, without further media attacks being made on President of the United States. Even my 3-year-old son knows who Donald Trump is because I've been watching TV all the time. Many would argue that this so-called witch hunt by the world's media is of Donald Trump's own making, but I doubt that. To be called a liar in such a public hearing as Comey's testimony can only exacerbate Trump's low approval ratings. And this in turn has a knock-on effect with the president failing to fill many key administration appointments 4 months into office. The fact is that many talented and experienced people who have been offered jobs simply don't want to be associated with this man. Whether Donald Trump sees out his entire presidency is now being openly discussed. Whichever way you look at it, the office of president has been badly tarnished by the continuing daily soap opera of President Trump.